All right, we will reconvene to open session. Evelyn, can you start us off with a roll call?
Trustee Lee,
Here.
Trustee King is absent. Trustee Marcus,
Here.
Vice President Weekly,
Present.
President Wells.
Here. For 4.2, I'm going to report out on our closed session from this evening. In compliance with the Brown Act, the Board of Trustees reports that during the closed session, the board took action to initiate legal proceedings related to a due process matter under the Individuals with Disabilities Act. The board, by a vote of 4 ayes, has directed legal counsel to proceed with filing a due process complaint with the Office of Administrative Hearings against the parent guardians of a student within the district. Due to confidentiality laws governing student records and special education matters, no further details regarding this action may be disclosed at this time. Good evening, and welcome to the November 19th, 2025 meeting of the Redwood City School Board. Bienvenidos. Si requiere interpretación al español, por favor llama al 978-990-5137 y presione 837-7041 y el signo de número. Si asiste a la reunión en persona, solicita un transmisor situado al fondo de la sala. All right, thank you all for joining us. The board encourages all members of the public to participate in the meeting and provide comments on issues of concern, regardless of whether they're on the agenda. If you're here in person and wish to speak, you'll find speakers cards available at the entrance to the room. Just complete one and hand it to Evelyn. If you're on Zoom, please complete a speaker's card online. There's a link in the agenda, or just raise your Zoom hand when the item comes up. And if you're addressing a subject listed on the agenda, you'll be called at the time that item is being considered. And if the issue is not on the agenda, you'll be called shortly during oral communications. And then, to be fair to all speakers, we limit public comment to 3 minutes per person per topic unless otherwise noted. And with that, we're on to the agenda. There are changes for the agenda. I have 2. One is to pull the consent agenda item 11.14, which is the second reading of the board bylaw 9250, and also to pull from action items 12.1, which is the approval of the retirement notification incentive. Does anyone have any other changes to the agenda? All right, then can I get a motion to approve the agenda with those 2 changes?
I move we approve the agenda with those 2 changes.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay, public comment. I see none, and none on Zoom, and Evelyn, none in person. All right, then we will move on from public comment. And we'll go right into our school and community reports. And we're going to start off with information on artificial intelligence tools supporting teaching and learning.
So good evening. Today we have our staff development coaches. TOSAs are Kathy James and Bronya Witt will be presenting on AI and where we are at this point in time with the district. All right. Turn on the mic. Yeah, the little person.
Yeah.
There you go.
I even asked Carlos and then I didn't do it.
Good evening. So I'm Kathy,
And I, Branya.
and we were asked to be here tonight to give you a little bit of background information on where we are with AI in our district, what we've been learning, and where we kind of need to go next.
One more.
There's our lovely
Yeah,
avatars
sweet.
created by AI.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with giving just a brief overview of kind of what's been happening the last couple of years, where we are with AI. Really, AI came onto the picture for education in the school year of 2022 to 2023.
It's what to say.
And that's when we first started to experiment with ChatGPT and what was then Google Bard, and eventually Magic School was another tool that came on the scene. And we began to do initial research and reading about the tools, exploring with them. Some teachers explored them, and we held a couple of optional PDs for teachers to talk about what generative AI was and a little bit about prompting. And we had kind of our early adopters who went out and tried things and to see what it would be like with their teaching. And then in 23 to 24, we started to see some of the products that we pay for as a district begin to incorporate pieces of AI into their products. And so we started to see how those were appearing for our students and to get an understanding of that. Branya and I also attended the Q conference, which is the big ed tech conference for the state. And it was all about AI at that point. So we learned quite a bit about some of the ethical questions we should be considering, some of the things that the tools could do, some ideas for how they could be used in the classroom and for as teacher efficiency tools. And so we brought that information back with us. In 25, the tools began to just rapidly expand. There are a number of things out on the market, a lot of churn. We kind of have knowledge from our history and working with EdTech to know that adopting some things, paying for those things too early can backfire on you because some of those tools will get gobbled up by other tools. Some of them will go away. Some of them will rise to the top. And so we've taken kind of a like wait and see approach and like been watching what's been happening, experimenting with the different tools, allowing teachers to experiment with some of them if they are appropriate for class use, but not advocating for a full-on adoption at this point. And then we attended a series of workshops that the county gave for districts in the county to be thinking about AI and particularly about AI policy and guidance for staff and students. And then this year, we have done some presentations for our administrators, done some incorporated some AI tools in some of our PDs that we've offered to staff, and continued to work on guidelines for staff and students, but also to consult with your board policy committee in terms of putting forth a draft for policy that's coming soon. And then just the next step for us is that just yesterday, Branya and I found out that we were accepted and we applied and were accepted to a cohort that's a statewide cohort sponsored by the CDE Foundation to study AI in education with districts throughout the state. So we'll be attending those meetings as well.
So where we are in our journey right now, our next step, as Kathy just mentioned, we created some preliminary guidance that we will be expanding on. One of the things that we talked about when we went to the county last year was that this is the point where we want to really work on a district-wide policy. And that will be sort of the next foundation before we can move forward with rounding out guidance and really working with teachers on PD. So we're here to talk a little bit about what that policy might look like and what our next steps would be after that gets passed. So one of the things we really want to talk about is the idea of in education, we want our policies and to be about our mission and our values and our vision and not about the tool. So if we look at our district mission, vision, and values, next slide, and even just look at solely the mission of creating a safe and supportive, inspirational and rigorous, joyful and inclusive environment for all learners. When we take that and talk about AI, educational AI use in our district, that brings up a lot of questions. When we talk about a safe and supportive environment, how do we really make sure that we're encountering it in a way that is safe? How do we make sure that we are supporting everyone? How do we make sure that we enhance rigor and not make it so that it's doing the work for people? We really need to keep all of our mission and vision and values in mind as we move forward. we had the great opportunity last week to meet with a friend of ours, Victor Lee, who used to be actually an RCSD parent, although his kids have all graduated now. But we worked with him a couple of years ago with one of our PD cohorts, and he met with us for lunch. He happens to be the faculty lead at the Stanford Accelerator for Learning's initiative on AI in education. So it was a really good opportunity for us to pick his brain. He's been doing a lot of work with the research specifically in education. And he had this great analogy of seeing AI in the same way as the advent of the car. When the car came along, it changed how people lived. It changed the layout of cities. It changed what opportunities we had for work because we suddenly didn't have to be tied to someplace really close to us. It really changed society. We don't want Redwood City to be the place that says, no, we don't need cars. That would not really be in service of our adults or our children. But at the same time, we're a community with cars, but we don't. We spend children's childhood saying, okay, look both ways before you cross the street. Hold my hand when we go in the crosswalk. Make sure you pay attention to this crossing guard. So we need to have that balance. Back when cars first came out, even for adults, we didn't just say, here, I'm going to teach you all how to drive and here's keys. We had to have highways, and those highways had to be built with the right grade so that if we had a turn, we didn't topple the car. That had to be studied. We had to have gas stations. We had to have ways to get the gas to the gas station. We had to have ways for the gas to go from the tank to the car. We had to have ways to put belts and hoses in people's hands so that if something happened to the car, they could fix it. There is a lot of groundwork that goes into adopting something that's going to change society. So we want to keep all of that in mind and really center. Sorry, I went on for a long time. We really want to center on the ultimate educational goal, and again, not on the tool. So I probably should have said all of this after this next slide, but here is our initial district stance, our guidelines of making sure that we have human-centered AI use for adults so far. So we're emphasizing humans in the loop and thinking of AI as a thought partner and assistant, and always centering on the human. Align our use to the educational goals and vision of the district site and classroom. Make sure we're always, 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 always protecting student privacy. Considering equity and ethics, and only use AI for tasks that you have the time and background knowledge to double check, and then actually make sure that you double check it.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the tools that we are seeing being used. So I'm going to start with talking about the tools that teachers have been using and what some of the things that you might see that they're using them for. So all of the ones on here are ones that have surfaced that we've heard about through teachers or we've seen them using. There are numerous other ones. They keep new ones every day. But ones that we're seeing, some of the tasks that we're seeing frequently being done with them are that teachers are using them to get ideas for lesson planning, figuring out how to change the level of an activity to make it more differentiated for different levels in the class, getting feedback, ideas for feedback on student work, ways of giving them feedback that's positive, but yet drives them forward to the next step. Getting help with wording things like emails. Sometimes it can be hard to email a parent, and AI gives them maybe like a better way of framing it. We've seen teachers searching for asset-based language for like feedback, again, on report cards for students, searching for specific instructional strategies for particular needs that get surfaced. And as we're doing our MTSS work at the sites and using data and looking at the site goals, we expect there to be more of those kind of questions that they might ask about how can we differentiate for these particular student needs, and what can we bring to the table. And AI is is a thought partner in those things. But we, encourage teachers to be checking what it is doing as they're using it. And then we also have been seeing teachers use it to create rubrics, which it's really a help in doing the first draft of a rubric, because rubrics have all these little boxes you have to fill in. They kind of are tedious to sort of fill in and level. But we also encourage them to go through and edit and make them really customized to their assignments. Then we're seeing, like I said, if we can go to the next slide. Oh, I forgot about this one. So we're seeing them show up in a lot of our tools. And just the beginning of this year, Google, right like the week before school started, came out with, here's all these new tools that we're giving to teachers. And so now embedded in Google Classroom, which our teachers use to manage their assignments and classes, there are a whole set of kind of pre-done tools where they've prompted it already to give an easy response for teachers. So teachers can go in and ask, like, can you help me brainstorm real world examples for this? And there's a button for that. So these tools are there for all of our teachers to use. In addition to Notebook LM, which we've been trying to model for both teachers and administrators, we see that as being a really strong tool. And also Google Gems, which allow teachers to kind of create a template of a prompt that then they can use in multiple situations. So like they could write a whole prompt about, ask me what level my student is reading at, ask me what their iReady scores are, do this, and then suggest to me, so you can do kind of a whole sequence, save that sequence, and then come back to it again and again. And then on the next slide, these are some of the products where we're seeing it show up for students. So we have taken the approach that we do not, at this point, recommend opening up full access to a generative AI like ChatGPT or Gemini for students. But we do see a number of our tools using elements of AI, and we're trying to understand how to use those better. But some of the ways that we're seeing it, like in products like Adobe Express and Book Creator and Canva, which we have across the district, there are ways to do image generation that have been created to be safe for students. So the guardrails are there. It's not going to create something that's inappropriate. It's not going to let them, make a naughty picture with the AI, but they can use it for academic purposes. So a teacher might ask them to generate a book cover for the book that they read for their independent reading. And through the way that the student prompts the image generator and the images that come out, you can tell something about what they understood about the story, about the book. So it can be used in a creative way to do assessment or to enhance like a project that they're working on. The other way we're seeing it in Google Classroom, they have a tool called Practice Sets that lets students, teachers set up questions and students can interact with them. They have some AI components in there too, in terms of suggesting additional learning things if the students get the questions wrong. They kind of give a playlist of things that they could do to get to understand that concept better. And then Notebook LM that I mentioned earlier, we are only allowing for teachers at this point, but the power of Notebook LM is that
I'm just saying it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The power of Notebook LM is that teachers or staff can upload their own documents to it and make a whole kind of set of things and then ask questions about that set of documents. So we can put in the state standards, we can put in the strategies that we've done for PDs, we can put in all these things, and then we can ask questions against those, which makes it a lot more accurate in its responses and a lot more customized to us. as well as it has some fun features where it can make videos or podcasts that sound like real people talking about the subject. So, so that's kind of cool. And we've been having teachers experiment with that in their work process. And then Newsela is one that we've paid for several years, where they have brought in a new writing tool. And in that writing tool, when students submit their essays, teachers can set it up to give automatic feedback using AI. So this is something where we've had a few teachers experimenting with it. They've been giving me feedback, and we've been giving feedback directly to Newsela, and they've been improving based on things that we've brought to their attention. And so we really see this possibility of the rapid feedback to students being a strong use of the AI. It takes teachers a long time to get to the writing feedback sometimes, but we know from research that the sooner they get the feedback, the more effective it is. So if we can make sure that that feedback is truly accurate and it's truly along the lines of what a teacher would say, then it gives that added layer of that fast feedback before the teachers are grading the work.
So bringing us back to this idea of the 4 C's of human-centered AI implementation in education, this is something that keeps getting brought up as we go to conferences and go to series of meetings. The idea that for adults and for students, using AI in education is meant to foster critical thinking, curiosity, collaboration, and communication. It's about enhancing education and helping kids think. And we were struck by the parallels with our district learner framework. This, if we keep these ideas in mind, we really are enhancing the path that we've already been going forward on with our empowered learners, our effective collaborators, our knowledge constructors, and our creative communicators. So this is one thing that we want to keep in mind as we build PD for both teachers and helping teachers to talk to kids about AI and what is it that they need to be aware of in their world, because they are hearing about it and they are surrounded by it. So how can they think about it with curiosity and critical thinking?
So just recently, I attended the Accelerate EdTech Impact Summit at Stanford, and this was a one-day conference that brought together researchers from Stanford with CEOs and execs from the tech companies, with funders who support the research and education, and then educators. So all in one room to have a conversation about ed tech, but in this case, it was all about AI, really. So I saw a number of panels with experts, and you can read some of the quotes that were included in the slides. But generally, just the sense of the day was that a lot of the conversation was kind of gravitating towards what is the human aspect of AI, and in education in particular, what do we need to put our attention on? And it really is the things that Branya was just talking about. The word curiosity came up a lot on the panels. The word imagination came up a lot, and the word discernment came up a lot. And so just thinking about how are we making sure that we are helping our students to be good at those 3 things, so that they can at some point use these tools and have the discernment to use them well, but maintain their curiosity and their thirst for learning, rather than thinking of them as a way of shortcutting that.
Then we wanted to just give you a brief overview of the handbook that we created. We spoke with the site administrators at the beginning of the year, right before school started, and did a little walkthrough, did some playtime with them to show them what was available in our handbook. As we said at the beginning, once the policy is in place, we can start expanding on the handbook. but we have a few places here where there's some scenarios where we walk people through some stop, slow, and go. Here's what you really want to go ahead and leverage AI for, but here are some places where you should stop and pause. And then some more district resources and of course the bullet points that we already went through about making sure that you take care of student privacy and check the work, etc.
So next slide. Then for our next steps, we're going to continue to work with you to help inform the school board policy. So I think that you have your school board policy committee is going to be presenting a draft to you soon. And so we will work with them in terms of coming up with the administrative regulations to go along with that. And then once it becomes policy, we will work with you to implement the things that are in that policy and what you decide to set forth in terms of kind of our next steps in this area. We want to create criteria for evaluating and recommending tools. So like we said, we've been kind of waiting and watching on the tool front, but at some point we will probably be looking at adopting something new. And we want to kind of know what it is that we're looking for when we do that. So we want to get some criteria in place and have a process for evaluating as that comes up. And then as we continue on, we will continue our professional learning opportunities. We want to do some more work around the ethical and professional use of AI for teachers and for administrators. We want to take the opportunities that we have to give them practical tips for using AI as part of their MTSS process or for the differentiated learning that they need as a result of that. And then we're going to continue to work with the teachers who are kind of more out front on this to experiment and to kind of look and get feedback on what they are seeing when they try some of the AI tools and when students are actually using things. What are we seeing that we need to be considering about in terms of restrictions or things that are just like, wow, we need to see more of this. So we're going to be kind of watching that and then thinking about like which things need to get rolled out in a bigger and wider basis. And I think that kind of covers our overview. So we're happy to take questions if you have.
All right. Thank you, Rania and Kathy, for coming and presenting tonight and sort of covering this and the conferences you've gone to. And congratulations on making it into the state cohort. Do people does any trustee want to start with questions, comments, or discussion? Cecilia, please.
Sure. Thank you again for the presentation. I love the collaboration and obviously your curiosity for actually helping and making the connection with all the teachers and staff that uses AI. My question is, what percentage would you say that what percentage of teachers are using AI? And do you maybe feel or believe that there are still teachers are still a little bit hesitant to use it? And if so, are you guys there trying to help them navigate this new era, I guess?
I think it really depends on what grade level the teachers are, but we do see the gamut. I mean, we see some who are don't have any plans to try at all. And then we see some who just can't wait for the next use case.
I think on the middle school side, we are seeing teachers using it kind of in that thought partner role that we talked about for getting ideas for lesson plans and helping them write some things. They're not always, I would say, transparent about their use. So it's hard for us to kind of quantify. I think in some cases they might be afraid that it would look bad on them to admit that they're using the AI. So we can't necessarily get a clear sense of what they're doing with it. We do know, I mean, like I know a handful, like 3, 4 teachers who have lots of questions about it and who are willing to try things and who, when they see me, want to talk to me about what they're doing or the new tools that they've seen, but that's not necessarily the typical. And I think Anna, did you want to, I can see you kind of
And I
not.
have one more to add too, but
Okay.
I'm doing a teacher survey, and so out of the response that we've had of 45 so far, about 21 have said that they are using some form of
don't
AI.
have.
Majority are not, though. A lot say no, no way are we gonna do this, so there's just a lot of hesitancy, I think. So far.
And just as with anything really, we did have a few teachers who used it early on, and then we're always going to see hallucinations and incorrect information, but there was more of it earlier. And so if you tried something and found out, oh my gosh, look at this, it's not really helping me, you're going to be more hesitant to try it again soon.
Okay. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
David Lee, yeah.
I'll echo all the stuff. Thank you for putting this together, and also good to see you guys in person. I know that I was on the policy committee, so I saw your squares, but great to see you in person. Part of it's funny because I think we went through it cold, and you've given me the gift of learning more, and so now I have more questions, and but that, I guess that's how it goes, is iterating. It's also super timely, and like kudos to the district because uh, CSBA has a policy. I feel like we're ahead of the game in terms of like really figuring this out, which is amazing. Working with other trustees on and sampling what their concerns are across the county. AI is like one of, if not the top question. So I love that we're doing that. I guess the only thing that I had a question on, reflecting now on the presentation and the board policy is, and I mentioned this before, but a lot of it, I think a lot of the draft, Wendy, thank you for circulating that to everybody because I think it's super helpful. A lot of it's framed like very positively and principles based, which is very good in some ways, right? It's like encouraging to do the right things. And then I think a little bit buried in there is like, and use it accountably, which is good. But I feel like I'm a little, I want to make sure that we're making the right balance of encouraging staff to like take this on as a tool to multiply their effectiveness while also guarding against the risk of over reliance, right? Because like
Right.
we've seen that in multiple professions, and it's not going to be any different here too. So the one thing that I'm thinking about now is how can we build that in a way that's broad enough to still encompass all the things that we're not going to be able to anticipate, but similar, like with a principle of what are the things that we are afraid of that we know for sure we don't want staff to do, and then like how do we build that into the policy? And I don't know if you have thoughts, and this isn't like a question for you now. I think we're probably going to talk through the policy later, and maybe AI can help us with it too. But that maybe something to chew on. And if you have initial thoughts on that, like.
I mean, my initial thought is kind of going to the difference between policy and guidelines. And policy is sort of a broader umbrella of the rules, whereas guidelines are going to be more specifically about that are set by the leadership team and are the things that are going to be around feedback. It's harder to give feedback about a policy, whereas you can give feedback about guidelines. That would be my initial reaction to your question, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense, but to push back a little bit, I think one of the things you mentioned was in the handbook, you guys are in the process of also building out some of the don'ts. So I imagine those don'ts are coming from something, like we are guarding against something at a broader level. So I think that's what I'm trying to suss out. Like what is it exactly that we want to capture there?
I think, so I think that some of this could come in the administrative regulations.
Yeah.
Because I do think that there were statements in the draft policy about ethical use and
Right.
and citing sources, but I think some of the concerns that we have that would come out in the more specific regulations would be around like specifically the don'ts around
Protecting privacy.
putting student information into the chatbots, making sure that we've got the guardrails for privacy, making sure that that teachers and students know how to cite the fact that they used AI, that we're not hiding the fact that we're using AI. We don't have like a clear answer on this, but I think that there's a big question on some of the tools that help teachers to grade or to give feedback. What are the kind of legal implications of them having access to that student work, and what kind of what kind of things do we need to keep in mind about, if students are only getting feedback from technology and not from the teachers, and how is that impacting grades, and what kind of legal ramifications could be there. So I think some of those things we need to still kind of figure out. Statewide, people are trying to figure out. So I'm not sure that there's like a clear policy line to put on that, but I think we should be adding them into our ARs as we go, because I think that we're going to see that those things are important and important to spell out. So I don't know if that doesn't fully answer the question, because I think your question is also our question, like what else what else should be there? But our feeling is that the policy needs to give the guardrails, the general guardrails at this point, and then everything is changing so quickly that it's such a moving target. So it gets difficult to nail down every single don't that we should put in.
I mean, if you go back to the car analogy, initially cars couldn't go that fast. So they didn't realize they needed a speed limit until it became an issue. And I feel like AI is going to be similar to that.
Yeah, totally get it. Thank you.
Thanks, David Weekly.
Thanks. This is an area I have a lot of thoughts about. I really appreciated the back and forth in advance of this meeting as well. You two are clearly really engaged on this topic, which is exactly what we want to see. And congratulations again on the award. I feel like there's a lot of thoughtfulness in terms of like the risks, the concerns, the guide rails, like, and that's awesome. And we want to see that. I'd love to see kind of the flip side of that is like, what are you most enthusiastic about seeing transformed in this district by AI on student behalf, on teacher behalf, on staff behalf? Like, what are some of your hopes for what we could roll out on what kind of a timeline to have what kind of impact?
Do you have something
I
right away? I'm gonna
the
think for a
first
second.
thing that pops into my head, and I don't know that this necessarily will be what pops into my head a week from now,
Sure.
but just hearing one of the things I've been working with is teachers in really implementing our 10-step. At this point, it's only a 5-step comprehension process because they haven't finished the training yet, but the first 5 steps. I do feel that being able to use AI as a thought partner in creating those materials and going deeper with them and understanding them better, I see a lot of potential there for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I see, I guess, a couple of things that I sort of alluded to earlier. One would be that we've been working a lot with teachers on writing this year. That's been a site goal for many of our middle school sites. And so as I've been coaching with teachers, I have to say in the 13 years that I've been here, I've tried talking with teachers about using rubrics for grading numerous times, and it's always been kind of a hard sell. But we're seeing a much bigger uptick of them using it as we're working on the writing work now. And one of the things that we've been able to easily do is kind of say, like, let's feed your assignment into the AI and the standards that you're trying to address from the state, and have it generate a rubric that has the criteria that we're looking for, and then using that as a draft. And that's been a really big time saver. And it seems very doable to teachers when we're modeling it for them. And so like I see an increase just from that one use. And so I think just in terms of like the efficiency and like the things that we're asking teachers to do are getting harder and harder, but there are ways that the AI can make that faster and take the burden off of them. And so that I think is exciting to me. I think that the idea of using it for feedback is also something that where I see a really I see that as being promising, and that's something that I've been working with a few teachers to really investigate how well that's working, specifically with Newsella writing, but
Yeah.
there's other tools that we're looking at that do the same thing.
These are great, like teacher-centered answers. The first bullet point in the proposed policy here is student-centered, and I'm curious. You've given some of the guardrails of what would need to be true to start opening these tools up to students constructively. But I would love to hear some thoughts from you about student transformation vis-a-vis use of AI in the learning process.
So, sorry, I'm just trying to think here. What would be a good example? So I do think, so I'm just going to go back to sort of the roots of my ed tech message, which is that whenever we're asking students to use technology in the classroom, we really see the strength of it being when they use it to create rather than to consume.
Yes.
So I'm not interested in having them use AI to generate the answers to the questions that the
Totally.
teachers asked them.
Yeah.
But rather to be thinking about how can they use AI to make videos, for example, to make graphics for things, to like be imaginative and come up with things that they want to make, and then how could they make them use with AI as a thought partner in that. And so I think that there are some tools where we're starting to see that be available to students. It's harder to answer this one in that we have been more focused on the teacher uses at this point than we have on the student uses. And so, we have a few teachers who are willing to experiment, but not a lot. And so with any technology adoption, that's kind of typical that we have the people who are sort of like the explorers that are out there on the cutting edge. And then most teachers are going to wait until we say, go.
So
Like,
when do we say go for the teachers? And then B, I understand wanting to sequence, like focusing on the teachers before we roll things out to the students, but just hallucinating as you would, some timelines here. When do you think we say yes for opening this up more broadly for teachers and sort of having this be a baseline expectation? And then B, when do we start opening this up for students to begin creating with these tools?
I think one of my concerns with that is just the time to do the professional development.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like one of the speakers the other day at the Stanford Summit said, we like to prompt the humans before we prompt
I saw
the
that
AI.
quote. Yeah.
And then she used that to launch into the need for professional development. And so we have limited time for professional development, and that time is often taken up with our curriculum, which as it should be. And so we need to be creative, I guess, with figuring out how the AI professional development gets woven in there. But I'm reticent to say that we're going to rush into this without laying a good firm groundwork with that training. So it makes it a little hard to predict the timeline. AI itself is going way faster than any ed tech has ever gone.
Yeah.
And our systems are not going at that speed.
Totally. And I think that means sort of as was alluded to earlier, we're probably going to need to check in on this topic a little bit more regularly than like, hey, let's talk about this again in 3 years, and like maybe something will have changed between now and then. But B, that things at home and the kind of access to technology that our students and parents and community members have access to is going to not be constrained by thoughtful policy guidelines about like what we do open up and don't open up. And how does that change, for instance, how we think about homework as a district?
Well, so one of the things I was going to add to what Kathy says is we want to have the foundation for adults, but we also need to have a foundation for kids before they can start using it. And that would be teaching them to think critically of what they see that is generated by AI, much like they need to know more about anything that's in their world, their media world. And I actually am excited about that opportunity to teach them to look at these things critically, because that really is the crux of the type of thinking and learning that we want them to be doing, and it's relevant to them. And then that would, so that really is time sensitive. They, as you say, they are already exposed to all of this. And how do we make sure that they understand when they're seeing things on their, I don't even know if Instagram is what they look at anymore, on their TikTok or whatever, so that they can think about it before they consume it.
But it's like, do we assign homework?
Oh, so that is not our question.
But it's salient. It's
Yeah.
relevant.
I think
Yeah, no, it is.
I mean, but I think it's a question that's good for you as board to consider as
Mhm.
this evolves. But I also think that we'll see both in-class assignments and homework
Yes.
assignments
Yeah.
needing to change.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
university professors are already encountering this, that they're
Mhm.
having to rethink
Yeah.
the way that they give assignments, so that it isn't something that can be done strictly with the AI. I mean, without any thought or agency from the human involved.
And this is something that teachers already had to encounter once before when we were in sheltering, or when we were doing distance learning, they had to change a lot of their assignments because we needed to make sure that the parents weren't doing it for them. So, which happened. Sorry. But so it is, we have to be agile.
But at the same time, I mean, we're seeing, we're going to see a growth in products that can give students practice problems that are at the level where they need to be, and potentially offer them sort of tutorials and that kind of thing. And those may be good uses at home.
We talked about how this could be used for teachers to help them better prepare materials. Some of those materials now could include like fully interactive websites and programs. All of our teachers could be programmers of interactive educational materials that that becomes a thing you can do casually now, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah,
Cool.
there's a lot that you can
Yeah.
do.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited about these. Thanks again for the presentation. I think, you guys asked great questions. All my questions were mostly centered around like what would the policy look like. And now that I've seen the draft, I've got a much better sense of what kind of things are in there. I guess the thing that, because it is so early in adoption or hasn't even really been rolled out, it'd be awesome to be thinking about like how we'll know if AI is actually improving outcomes particularly for like our unduplicated students, and our English learners, and not just making school like high tech, and kind of pulling that in. And sort of envisioning like what is success like a year from now, so we can come back. I'm sure some of the indicators are like the ones that are in the LCAP and things like that, but there's probably things like engagement in classroom, or like, are we seeing, what sort of trends are we seeing out of there? And then you mentioned about how it's moving so fast, and it made me think like it is moving like crazy fast. Like you may want to look at even thinking in advance about like, how do we sunset something? Like if it's not really being effective for student outcomes, like should we be just have like a sunset policy in there and be kind of rigorous about like, hey, these are the ones that are working, use them, great. These ones aren't, we're going to take them away, and put that in. So awesome, very exciting. And thanks for sharing the things that you're excited about too. John.
Thank you both, Kathy and Branya, for being on the cutting edge of this. It's quite exciting and at the same time a little bit scary. One thing that concerns me, and I know David, you brought it up, David Weekly, in regard to what how our parents will use it at home with the students. We have parents, that are quite different, and when it comes to resources.
Yeah.
So the thing that bothers me most is that our parents who don't have those resources and may not have the ability, education-wise also, to truly understand the guardrails, because that's a big issue. Everything you read and any type of research that's coming up in regard to students, especially, I understand the high school, and I know the high school superintendents have been working with this with their staff, but the elementary, especially those guardrails, are so important, and really to emphasize that with our parents, and then to take it one step further for us, con los demás que hablan todo español y no entienden. For everybody else who speaks only Spanish and has a difficulty understanding. That's the critical piece for myself. And I just hope that we keep that, in mind.
Definitely.
But great presentation. I would like to see any projects that the kids have done so far, especially with the Notebook LM. Are there some?
We haven't turned a notebook LM on for children
It's
yet.
not for kids yet.
It's so amazing. Like in about 2.5 minutes with Notebook LM.
I can go in and.
Oh, yeah.
Quick.
And in 2.5 minutes, I put together a 10-minute explainer video on quasars with like 20 different questions to check for understanding that were really well done. And this was all researched with like 120 different sources, including NASA.gov. It was just, Notebook LM is awesome.
Yeah.
Come downstairs tomorrow and we'll show
I
you.
will have to check it out with they're always willing to, I mean,
Yeah.
way back when you guys started and I was in the curriculum and instruction piece, you helped me out quite a bit with the technology.
Just for completeness, my peers in industry use Notebook LM to educate themselves.
Right.
So when they need to come down a learning curve on some technical topic or a new industry, they'll go dump a whole bunch of material into Notebook LM and then like make a podcast and listen to it on the drive in. So the world of education is being transformed by this stuff, even outside of education.
I will say that I heard in one of the online groups that were part of that neighboring district that their board put all of their board policies into Notebook LM so that they could query them quickly and ask questions against
Here we
the
go.
policies.
Smart, yeah. I know what one of our board members is doing this weekend.
That's a good task.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I want to be considerate of your time and our next speaker's time, so appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure we'll
Thank
corner
you.
you in a social event and, pick your brain at that point. So, let's move on to our discussion items. The next one is 10.1, and it's an update on the local funding measure analysis. John, you
Yes,
do the
we have-
introduction, and
we
then we
have,
have Jeremy
we have
here.
Jeremy Hauser here with us this evening. And do you have his, who has his? If you can send it to maybe Anna, and then Anna can go through it. So Jeremy's here to give us a little recap on how we got to this point of where we are right now, and then to do a little bit of summary and remind us of where we were in regard to the poll, and then our next steps. We know we have a date coming up in March that we all have to be aware of, and if we're going in this direction, we need to start. I would envision that, from December moving forward, we need to really we really need to get, well, I should say, I need to get my ducks in a row so that I can start working very closely with the community and also with Amy Buckmaster again in regard to yay or nay and us making that decision. I'm hoping sooner than later.
Thank you. And that's a tough act to follow. I will try to keep my my content as interesting as the AI nexus with education. But we got to talk about taxes instead. So apologies. So as Dr. Baker mentioned, I wanted to spend just a few minutes tonight kind of recapping where we've been in the parcel tax exploration process and our recommended next steps as we look toward placing a measure on the ballot next June. So first, just a quick reminder of, the last few times we've been in front of you as a board. We were here in March to talk about this in concept, the idea of a supplemental parcel tax based on square footage, talk about the pros and cons of that, the legal parameters, and possible election dates. We then came back in April and made it official and got our contract approved and got direction from you to work with Brian Godby at Godby Research to actually do some polling to get a better understanding of what may or may not be feasible in terms of a parcel tax. That polling was conducted in late May and early June. And then we came back to you in late August to present the results for that. You may remember the results were encouraging and showed that there was a path forward for a parcel tax measure next year. So on the next slide, if you would mind going forward, thank you. Just another quick reminder of the key milestones in the parcel tax planning process. You all have seen this slide a lot now. There really are three key benchmarks that we like to hit before we place a measure on the ballot. Right now, we're squarely in that awareness building phase, doing community outreach and engagement, both in a broad-based sense to voters and parents at large, but also, as Dr. Baker alluded to, stakeholder outreach and one-on-one meetings to get a better sense of what folks are thinking about a potential measure next year. Next slide, please. I wanted to recap the poll results quickly just to kind of remind ourselves the numbers we're talking about. You may remember that a parcel tax measure requires a 2/3 yes vote in order to be approved. And so when we did the polling earlier this year, we looked at a parcel tax measure that would be based on building square footage. We were looking at a measure that was 17.5 cents per square foot that would generate just over $14 million annually. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see the results of that. When we first asked voters if they'd be willing to support that, we got a 63.5% yes vote. We got 11% undecided and 25% no. After we provided more information about the potential uses of funds for that measure and some potential positive arguments, support jumped 10 points to 73%. And then when we did the inverse of that and we presented the listener with some potential negative arguments, support dropped back down to 66.4, right at that 2/3 threshold. On the next slide, we also have a summary of the top uses of funds in the eyes of voters, attracting and retaining qualified teachers and counselors, maintaining hands-on science classes, preserving science, tech, engineering, and math instruction, and so on down the list. These have certainly been a focus of ours in the outreach and engagement as we're starting to think through what a measure could fund. I think it's also just kind of helpful to remind ourselves, the big buckets that a parcel tax could help support in your schools. Next slide, please. Here you'll see some of the materials that we've been pulling together. We've got a fact sheet, FAQ, and PowerPoint presentation, webpage live on the district website. All of this information is available in English and in Spanish. A mail piece went out the door in the last few days. You might return to your homes to find it in your mailbox. Included in that is a brief tear-off survey that folks can mail back and give some basic feedback about a potential measure. And there's also been some social media content as well. There's been some stakeholder engagement and outreach, both to internal stakeholders like parents, teachers, and other staff, but also externally to business groups, other civic groups, to get a sense of where they're at on a potential measure. That feedback that's been received has been largely positive. That work will continue, but thus far there haven't really been any red flags that give us any pause. And I think the next slide just shows a little bit more of the content that's been sent out. You can see it's all branded in your district colors and made to look and feel like it's coming from you all, because it is. And we're excited to see the feedback that we get specifically from the tear-off mailer and the social media content that also directs to an online version of the same survey included in the mailer. Next slide, please. So now for the new info, what we need to do, what we recommend doing from now until when we bring a potential resolution back to you all as a board to qualify for the ballot. Just a quick reminder, our deadline to qualify for June is in early March. So we are going to have you all as a board adopt a resolution before then so we can make it onto that March ballot. So this slide kind of shows what the next few months would look like if we, want to keep this process moving forward. First, in November, we've got that first mailer going out. Like I said, it went out this week. It could be waiting for you when you get home. And really, we want to get direction from you all as a board on overall structure of the measure and whether or not to pursue a tracking poll to kind of check back in with voters and make sure that we're still on track for a measure next year. Following this meeting into December, we would do a second mail piece, really kind of recapping what we heard from that survey mailer and giving another opportunity for voters to weigh in on a potential measure. And we would also be working with the district team as well as the consultant team in drafting that tracking poll, should we get direction tonight to move forward with one, with the goal of fielding it in January, right? If we field it in January, we'll get data back in time to help you make an informed decision. While that tracking poll is being conducted, we would also do a third mail piece to kick off the new year, keep voters involved in the process, with the goal of bringing results to you at your February 4th meeting, as well as a first reading of a potential resolution. That would kind of be a 2-item evening. First, probably the results, and then second, our recommended language for a measure. And then that would leave February 11th as your last board meeting date before the deadline, where you would officially vote to place the measure on the ballot. Then after that, we do a final mailer to your community just to let them know the action you would take and give them the key dates and information about the election. Next slide, please. Now, I apologize, this is a little bit difficult to read, but I wanted to provide some data to you about some different revenue scenarios with a square footage measure. Obviously, you have that first number, which is the bottom row in the 17.5 cents per building square foot with no cap. So if you were to put a measure on the ballot without a cap at 17.5 cents, you would generate $14.3 million annually. We have talked in the past about the consideration of a cap, so we've included three different scenarios on this slide. I will say we are not wedded to any of these three. A cap can be any number that you choose, but we chose three that kind of display what happens when you put a cap on the measure. You'll see first that if we were to keep that same 17.5 cent per square foot rate and put a $5,000 cap on it, meaning any one parcel could not pay more than $5,000, you see that your revenue drops annually to $11.4 million. If that cap is reduced to $2,500, your revenue drops another $1 million to 10.4. And then if you were to put a $1,000 cap, your revenue drops to just over $9 million. Just to give you a sense of the scale there. I will say there are not a lot of parcels that would meet these caps. I think let me just pull up the exact numbers here for you. Yeah, at the $1,000 rate, you would have 1,469 parcels that hit your cap. At the $2,500 rate, you'd have 597, and at the $5,000 rate, you'd have 281. Just to give you a sense of scale there. And then so on this last slide, I promised to keep it to 10 minutes. Just wanted to kind of outline the direction that we're really looking to get from you all tonight to kind of help, spur on the discussion. First and foremost, is there a desire to do a tracking poll and tracking research? If so, as you've seen in that timeline, we got to get moving pretty soon. And I should mention that Brian Godby from Godby Research is on Zoom tonight and happy to answer any questions about that. And then also just wanted to get some more direction from you all on overall measure structure. So tax rate, whether or not to include a sunset. You'll remember the polling that we tested did not include a sunset, but it's our recommendation that we do include one because we saw it was the number one potential negative argument against your measure. And then also whether or not to include a cap. And before I kick it back to you all for questions and discussion, just to clarify, this direction we're looking for is really so that we can design a poll if we decide to do it with some parameters to give you some data to make your ultimate decision. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. I propose that we have discussion and questions right now, and then we'll go back around and give Jeremy the direction that we want to do. That way, everybody can have a chance to hear the discussion before settling on what the direction is. Unless you're firmly committed to one direction or another and want to sit it up first. Would anyone like to start with questions, discussion? Yeah, thanks.
I think probably less for Jeremy, more for us discussing, including Dr. Baker and Rick. Just in terms of the tracking poll, is there a scenario where we don't want to pursue this? I guess so. What would the outcome of a tracking poll have to be for us to say, no, thank you, we will not proceed?
It would definitely need to be those percentages going down.
Yeah.
More so than anything.
I guess
and what
to what degree?
What concerns me is that this was done during the summer at this point in time. It was done during the summer. I don't know, and Rick and I were speaking about this, I think it was today or yesterday. They're all rolling into one. In regard to, the economy and so forth, and is that going to have a play on this or not? And throughout that discussion, we kind of determined maybe it wouldn't. And so that was one piece. The other piece is that I had a visit from a board member who was on the board many, many, many years ago, Margaret Marshall. I'm sure no one here remembers that name. Maybe Maria,
I remember
you
Margaret,
do,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And pleasantly she came in, and I was wondering, I asked Evelyn, she's on my calendar. What's this about? And so Margaret remembers when I was in the classroom and we had this conversation, and she's very involved with the seniors and so forth in Redwood City, and her children and her grandchildren have all gone through the Redwood City School District. And amazing woman for her age, and just I was totally amazed. Said, would you come and talk to the senior citizens group about this? And I said, of course I would, because they were talking, and she goes, well, I know the superintendent. I'll go get him to come. So that was our meeting. And she is definitely one who has always been supportive of the Redwood City School District, always. And said, I want, yes, we know there are exemptions for seniors, but people should not have to take an exemption, not unless they really need to. And most of us do not need to take, and she went on and on about that. But I guess where my thoughts are coming is in regard to this poll, because she asked me the question, when did you do the polling? It was in the summer, wasn't it? And I go, yes. And she goes, do you know what people are thinking now? And it got me to think, I don't know. I would have to go back to what you just showed again, and that's where we were. Is our community still in that ballpark? I know a lot of our parents are, but the rest of the community and the percentage of parents that we have compared to those that are not parents and do like the Redwood City School District have other issues with us. Who
Yeah.
knows?
I guess with that, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not advocating for anything. Um, I guess for me, it seems like there's a pretty high need based on the situation that we're currently finding ourselves. Meetings yesterday, for example, that where additional revenue would be particularly helpful. And I guess I love data. I love information when it's helpful, but only insofar as it, changes the decision. And it seems to me, even if we get a result back that says it's gone down by even say 10 percentage points, like, does that change our answer? Like, or does that change the approach of
Jeremy. Yeah. If it went down by 10, it frankly probably would, because we'd be looking
Yeah.
at after negatives being at 56% yes. To be clear, I don't expect a poll to say that per se. But like you, I'm always a fan of having more data rather than less. And I think also if we are considering any structural changes, the biggest one being the cap, I would much rather have data back on that than not to help make the decision, right? And doing a poll isn't committing you to definitely going on the ballot or definitely not, or definitely including a cap or not, but it's helping you make a more informed decision once we come back to you with a resolution in February.
yeah,
And Jeremy, if I could add to that, a couple things. One, the ballot question changes because of the sunset, because we didn't have that in there before, and most of the attorneys have said you have to put reference to the sunset in the 75 words, which takes away from other things that we might want to have in there. So it is a material change in the ballot question. Two, if you're absolutely gonna be on the ballot no matter what, well, then it probably doesn't matter as much. But remember, you don't have to be on the ballot in June this year. You can also be on the ballot in November. So we want to win. What we don't want to do is plan a two-step strategy where we go forward without being somewhat blind, and then have to do it all over again in November, because that's really hard to do. So we want to win the first time around. Hopefully that's in June, but not necessarily. And with respect to the economy, I just finished a survey where where do you think the economy is going to be next year? The worst response is in the mid 60s. I have never ever seen it that high. And that's in a fairly affluent school district in Marin County. I mean, it's literally off the charts. So I think there are some material differences, to say nothing about the general political climate, which is, insane. And all those I think are good reasons to be doing a survey. Obviously, I'm the survey research guy, so I have a bias towards that, but I think we're not in a normal climate on multiple levels.
it sounds like there's the variance of opinions on the degree to which we might drop 10 points. But even so, I don't know. To me, that informs more so the rigor of effort on the back end than it does necessarily on decision. But I don't know. This is just my spitballing. I'm curious for others' thoughts.
I mean, on that topic, I think we just need to kind of figure out, like, as a board, what would be our risk tolerance, right? Would we be comfortable going forward based upon the current data that we have without getting more? I sort of felt like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if things have significantly changed since in the environment, since the obviously there's uncertainty, but there was a lot of uncertainty then too. In fact, the poll then had very high numbers for they're expecting the economy to be worse in the future, and yet there was still this a lot of support in there. It sounds like the thing that I wasn't thinking about is, and so I was wondering, like, what are the key questions that a new poll would answer for us that we don't already have from our baseline poll? I wasn't thinking about the change in the ballot language and whether and how that might need to be tested again. Um, I feel like there were enough variants in the baseline poll that it might have been covered there too. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the right question. And so then I look at it as just like, does a poll lower our risk profile, in terms of our risk tolerance? I'm not even totally sure it does. Yeah. So, yeah, it's uncertain to me that it's, yeah, totally necessary.
Yeah, I think for me it would be some theory that the world had changed meaningfully enough that it was now fairly likely that we were going to need to pull back from shooting for June. And we need some confirmatory bit of data that we either were living in a universe where it was going to be very unlikely for it to pass, and yeah, we should pull it, or no, actually, it's not as bad as we thought, and stay the course, charge ahead. I'm not sure I've yet been presented with enough convincing data that the world is very meaningfully different from when we did the last tracking poll that it would necessitate the expenditure and the extra time to go out and do an extra round of polling. That said, it's not something I feel super strongly about. So I'm persuadable on the topic if
Yeah.
people feel like we need the checkpoint.
And just one other thing, if the world has changed that much since the baseline poll and today, like is the yes, yeah, January to June might have some difference in there too. And again, I don't have a super strong opinion here on it. But that is kind of
Cecilia?
Well, I guess my question would be more for the experts. Like, should we go for another tracking poll or not? Like, is it gonna make a big difference? We also don't want to risk it, but at the same time, the financial situation the district is in. I think one of the biggest things is people do have to remember senior citizens are exempted from parcel taxes, so maybe that would be a selling point. But again, I just don't know how much.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I would say if the plan, it really depends on the other direction we get tonight, to be honest, because if the plan is to change nothing about what we tested in the last poll, then sure, we could probably make an informed decision early next year based on the data that you have. But if there is a desire to make a structural change or even explore one, i.e., really put a cap on the measure, that we would have to do research for that because that does fundamentally change your ballot language. It's ironic, it would not change the tax implication for any of your voters because the cap, as I alluded to, affects just your largest property owners. But we've seen time and again from research that when you include that extra dollar amount in your ballot question, it impacts voter support. So really, I think it comes down to your direction on the other items we talked about tonight. And if you want to explore looking at a cap, not even commit to one, then we absolutely need to do polling to explore that.
let's discuss thoughts on cap. By the way, could you share experiences from other districts with caps? Like what have they done and how has that affected their polling? Are there any other prior art that we could learn from?
Yeah, there's a lot of districts that include caps. Alameda Unified is the biggest example because they kind of set the case law on this type of measure. But we also passed two last year for Burlingame School District. Their cap, I believe, was $7,500, and Mountain View Wisman, their cap was 25. We also did pass one for Albany Unified without a cap, as well as Berkeley Unified without a cap. What we generally see in the polling is that including a cap actually depresses support early on because frankly it's just a little bit more confusing of a ballot question to read, but that once you have the opportunity to explain to the voter the intention and design behind the measure and the uses of funds, support usually rebounds pretty quickly. So we've looked at it apples to apples in multiple districts before, and it's been a pretty consistent finding.
It doesn't sound to me like adding a cap will be the make or break that will likely get this past the finish line.
No, the reason to add a cap is because if you've got a business owner or a large property owner who says,
They would back an ad campaign against it.
exactly,
And how
right.
have our conversations with the Chamber of Commerce been going?
So Amy has been, we have been meeting about this, and the last slide you showed with the information, that's what I need for her next. She's kind of hesitant right now with the cap, and I will not say what she said to me at the meeting on Friday where I was on the panel. But she says, if you can get that information to me sooner than later, and then we have the numbers that you have in regard to the properties and the apartment buildings and a couple other in Stanford. That will help us, help me get the information to her so she can start moving this pathway and give me a yay or a nay on it.
That sounds like pretty important information for this process.
Yep.
I mean, I'm just thinking about what we're trying to decide today, and I guess my view is we should get more details on the cap, but I don't know if that necessarily the majority of our voting, I assume, is going to be done, I hope, is going to be done by like constituents and individual people. And I have full faith that the Redwood City community backs education. So it sounds like the question is really, what is the degree to which we anticipate there being formalized pushback from the business community? And that seems more of a, I don't know if we need a tracking poll for that part. Like that's more of just we need to hash this out and have that discussion. We're not making decisions today on what the structure are, right?
No.
And then we also want to have the chamber support it.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Chamber support, A+. Chamber not against, good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask one clarifying thing, actually to Jeremy.
Yeah.
Just so we know what we're discussing tonight. I think that we're just discussing whether we want to do a tracking poll and what the parameters are that would go into that tracking poll. We're not actually making any decision about what we're
Correct.
doing going forward. Yeah. Okay.
And if I can take that clarifying question and run with it a little bit, one way we could structure this poll would be similar to the last poll where we would employ a split sample methodology where half of the respondents heard more or less the same measure they heard last time. 17.5 cents per square foot, no cap. The other half could hear a measure that included a cap, and you could compare the two apples to apples in real time, right? And the reason you're doing that is not to check in with the business community. The reason you're doing that is to get a read of, okay, if on February 4th, the chamber lines up 10 speakers to come to this podium and say, we're going to oppose this unless you put a cap on it. Well, now we have data that tells us what the impact of that cap being on the measure has in the community with people who are actually voting on it, right? So it's admittedly convoluted because again, the cap impacts not one voter, not one residence, but they are still the ones reading the ballot question and interpreting it with the data that's presented to them, which is why if there's any consideration, I say we certainly should do some polling just to give you the data, right? You could get the polling back and say, look, the data is compelling to us. We want to move forward with the measure without a cap. And now you have an answer to say as to why you did that.
Any other questions around cap? I also wanted to just have a quick discussion around sunset if people have questions around cap. Done. Okay. Could you, I know we talked about this when we went through the poll results before, but the sunset was the other one that we were going to look at to see because we did the until ended by voters, I think,
Yep.
from the original one.
Yep.
I think you were recommending 8 years, even though our current measures are 14. Like, what is state of the art for the amount of time that if we were to go for a sunset, and
Yeah.
what's sort of, again, like in other situations,
Yeah.
how have you seen sunsets affect poll results, and actually
Yeah.
ballot outcomes?
I'll start and then I'd love to kick it to Brian because he has data that kind of backs this up. I mean, I would say most commonly the sunsets that we see are between 7 and 9 years. And that really comes down to these psychological thresholds, same way that, stuff is priced at Target as $19.95 instead of $20, right? But so typically we see 7 to 9 years. Brian, if you want to speak to that a little bit more, what you've seen in the research when it comes to sunsets.
Yeah, Jeremy's absolutely right. Just like tax rates and things you buy at Target, there are psychological ceilings, and those are for dollar amounts, it's 19.95 versus $20. For the duration, it is a below 10-year number, so nine years, 9 months. You wouldn't do that probably, but 9 years will test substantially better than 10. 10 will be the same as 12. So that's the first psychological ceiling. The next one is at the 20-year mark, 1920. So 19 does better than 20. The exception to that is until ended by voters, which always does better than any of the double digit durations because it gives voters the perception that they have all the control, which they actually do, but it reinforces that. Whereas 19 years sounds like it's set in stone forever uh, from most voters' perspective. So if you don't do until ended by voters, anything in the teens probably won't work. Uh, but you have to go back into the single digit duration that Jeremy was suggesting, 7 years, 8 years, in that time frame to make up what you lose in the teens.
Okay. And I was just trying to remind myself when Measure U ends. I think Measure U ends in 2027.
I think it's 2031.
2031. 2031. And it's because that was a 14 year? 14 year. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone have questions, comments about sunset? All right, so I think we're trying to give direction here around whether we think we want to do whether we want to change the ballot language to test a cap, to test a sunset, whether we want to change the ballot language on there. And then if we do think we're considering changing the ballot language, that's something that we'd want to do come February. Do we want to start going down the path of a tracking poll? Before we do that, Jeremy, can you help us understand when, like, is there a way to do this in two phases? So, for example, can we give Dr. Baker like a couple weeks to get more information from the Chamber of Commerce of whether or not there's that feedback about a cap? Because that would really help. I think that would help the board, in their thinking about whether we want to whether we think we need to pursue a cap or not. So I'm wondering, like, is there a way to say maybe prepare to do a tracking poll, but then maybe we don't go out and execute on it and to step back, just last night we were doing budget reduction committee meetings
Yeah.
and things like that. So I
Yeah.
think top of mind for everybody is, are we making a wise expenditure here in the knowledge of knowing that we have a baseline poll that seems pretty strong. The external environment, and I don't need to speak for everybody, so just debate with me if you disagree. The external environment feels about the same as when
Yeah.
we did the baseline poll. And we're looking down, the line where even just last night there were line items on there for just even $10,000 of savings. So we just, we're trying to keep that in mind as we're making this decision.
Totally get that.
Yeah.
And yes, we could, and we don't have a lot of time, but we could wait a little bit longer. But what I will say is that by the time that we have to pull the trigger on a poll, we're going to have to do it make that decision in December, right? And even if we go forth or decide not to go forth with a poll, your opponents have any time in the calendar to come to you and say, we're going to oppose this if you don't put a cap in it, right? So there's just always going to be inherent risk, right? Like if we didn't do a poll and we just said we're going to come back to you on February 11th at your board meeting and bring your resolution without a cap, and the business community reaches out on February 5th and says, well, we want one. Well, now we don't know, right? So, maybe it's maybe being too risk averse, but to me, if it's even under consideration, I'd much rather have data to help back up the answer, right? And it's not, to be clear, we're likely to see that including a cap on your measure is going to decrease support, right? That is likely to be the finding. That's helpful to a point. What we're really looking at is, does it decrease it enough that it's not feasible? Or does it decrease it to a point where we're right at 2/3, but we still have support for a measure, right? Because that's helpful data as well.
Yeah. And last question is, can you, and this might be a question for Brian, but ballpark, I'm not asking for a quote, like a
Yeah.
ballpark cost for what the tracking pole would be.
I will definitely kick that to you, Brian.
Yeah, we actually did provide that to Superintendent Baker, and that for a 22-minute survey, which is shorter than the baseline, and also 400 interviews, which is fewer than the baseline as well, because we're trying to save money with Spanish translation and interviewing is about $38,000.
Okay. More information. And then before the board starts discussing the direction, I don't, Dr. Baker, did you want to chime in with what your thoughts are? I think I sort of heard an opinion from you earlier, but I don't want to read into that without you having a chance to.
The thing that I'm concerned about is the cap. And I know when Amy and I spoke last week, she's kind of concerned about it too. We didn't get into great detail because I was part of a panel, and this was during the time when it was a break time. And she goes, I need these numbers, get me these numbers. And so I've got the slide now that I can share with her. And I've got the information from our previous conversations on the districts that have gone forward with a cap and have been successful in those that, they put it on and they quite successful, and those that didn't, and then they were successful also. So that's the only thing that bothers me is the cap piece. And when I saw the numbers in there, I don't know, when even a small business, and I'm thinking some of our small businesses who are very vocal in the chamber are always supportive of the school district, but I could see some of them coming at us. But they're small. They're small.
Yeah, I mean, as a defensive measure, it seems, in the same way that putting a sunset in, because that was the number one negative, it
Yeah.
seems like it could be a negative and an easy way to mitigate against it. I guess it's still the question of do we need the additional data for that. Okay, so how are people feeling about a tracking poll?
Are we waiting for Dr. Baker to meet with the chamber before?
Within the
we
next two, we
decide?
can do it within the next 2 weeks. And I have figures now, and I have information from Rick that I can show her.
Can we give
mean, I
them a
guess-
deadline this summer?
Well, it's got to be sooner because break's coming, and I'm definitely not here. So we have to have it before then. That's she will probably work really diligently to get me an answer. So.
So let's play through the scenario real fast. If they were to come back and say, yes, we want to put a cap on it, would we want to, we think that it should be on there? How would you feel? Do you feel like the measure should go in the direction of including a sunset as well? What I'm trying to figure out is like, if we were to change the measure, like how are we thinking about changing it? Because if we're right now saying like, we're not going to change it at all. I mean, that might be one answer. We might be done tonight and not have to continue on the discussion. But if we're thinking like maybe we'd want to put a sunset on, then, or that kind of thing.
My druthers would be to have it as clean and simple as possible, so we can put as much of the impact language in there versus the asterisk language in there.
Okay. I think the language I need to look at it. Did the language say until ended by voters?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So the language has the sunset until ended by voters or for 8 years.
Yeah.
Until ended by voters.
No, that means no sunset.
It means no
and
sunset.
versus for 8 years or something like that if it had a sunset. So I don't think it doesn't change. It doesn't take out the impact language.
Well, but there's a fixed number of words. So every new word you put in, you have to take out another word.
Right. You
Yeah.
take out until ended
Yeah.
by voters and put in for 8 years. Yeah.
Except for in the large book.
Yeah.
The book.
I think for me, this is funny, maybe coming from a lawyer, maybe my risk tolerance is a little bit higher than others. I mean, I would rather us spend time figuring out through discussions with chamber, like what their general thinking is. I don't feel like that I need to get material information that's going to change what the approach should be from a tracking poll. so sorry, I'm going kind of to that direction.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
like David Weekly, my starting point is, I would love to keep it as simple as possible with no sunset, no cap, etc. for multiple reasons.
All right. Cecilia, how are you feeling about a tracking poll?
I'm kind of at the fence because I think, we already did it. Yet I'm a little hesitant because the experts are saying it might be a good idea if we go with the cap and a sunset, right? I guess depending on the conversation that Dr. Baker is going to have with the chamber, I guess it depends on the answer. I mean, I'm fine going without a tracking pool. But if there's some hesitant where maybe just to do things right, we have to, then we would. But I guess for right now, I would say too, we don't have to.
David?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I don't think that at this point, as of tonight, I don't feel that we need to have an additional tracking poll. I think if we get new data that indicates that we really ought to have a different question on the ballot, I think I begin to be more persuadable that that revised ballot language is something that we might want to poll on, but I don't think we have that today.
Oh yeah, wait, maybe that's a clarifying question. Is this an opportunity? I think we got lost in the conversation there, but Mike, I think your question was basically, could we not take action tonight, but effectively take action sometime in the next couple of weeks if we needed to?
Depends. When's your next board meeting?
It's December 10th.
Okay. Brian, what do you think? Do you think if we got direction on the 10th to do tracking research, we could turn it around in time for January?
We could, as long as there are people around from the district, and I heard John say he's not going to be. We would have to have final approval by December 23rd. Because we've got to be working the week after Christmas to get it programmed, and into the first week in January to be in the field on the 12th. The holidays do sort of slow that process down. Normally it's 3 days, but we just need more time because of the holidays.
So what does that mean, Brian? The commitment of time during the holidays?
An initial meeting, if we are approved on the 10th, then I'd want to have a meeting by the 15th of December to review a first draft of a questionnaire. And then we're going to go back and forth with it that week of the 15th. Ideally, we're done somewhere around the 22nd to the 23rd, I guess, because 24th is probably a holiday for everybody. So that's the challenge that we're running into, is we're running out of time.
And does that include also the members from the parent community that are working closely with us?
Yeah, we would want them to be involved in that too. Now we can pre-schedule that meeting, and just cancel it if you don't need it, but that would certainly help.
So if you can get me those dates so I can talk to those parents. And the other piece, as long as you can work around my time of that December, and I can have Rick during that time also, so we can just get our schedules together. I am going to be a bit out of the country for a bit of the holiday. So I can make it work just as long as I have definite days and times.
Sure. No, that's fine.
Okay.
And then just to check, if it came back and said, hey, there's a strong indicator that we need to put a cap on, does that change people's opinion about going out for a tracking poll? It is a different ballot measure. We've heard that it is going to affect the numbers. It always clearly does. Is that something that the board feels like it would want to measure? Or where's that? I guess that's the part that before they go through the struggle of like trying to figure out like how can we squeeze this all in, if we're just going to come around on the 10th anyways and be like, yeah, they say they want it, we don't want to do the tracking poll anyway. we might as well raise that now, and save everyone some time. But if it's something where we think like, yes, when we get that information back, if it says do the cap, then we really ought to go out and test it and do the split A/B as Jeremy suggested. Is that what people are thinking?
So I would say yes.
Okay.
Because I know we're in a financial issue.
Yeah.
And we're talking 38,000. But our district will benefit so much more if this passes. So I'm for that.
So I'm just trying to play out the situation. If we come back and the direction is there's a strong appetite from Commerce to have some sort of cap, and we decide to do a tracking poll, we are expecting those numbers to decline. Either like no matter what, we're expecting them to decline if we could test that. And so it's a question of how much.
I would say the expectation from my perspective, and again, the whole reason we do polling is to test our expectations and gut, is that compared in the same poll to the non-capped measure, we'd probably see lower support, right? If support has grown overall, then we might see that a measure with a cap is actually doing better than these numbers up on the screen. But that when you ask the other half of the sample this time around, these numbers have gone up even more, if that makes sense, right?
But the general effect of adding that language, you would expect, irrespective of whatever comparison, but like we expect that to be a lower.
That's what we've seen. We've explored this in other communities in the Bay Area. We haven't tested it that much, to be honest, right? It's a handful of districts, so we could be the first where there's no effect, or
Yeah.
voters like it even more, right? There again, that's why you did the research. But generally, what we've seen that there is a little bit of a depressing effect.
And part of that, I think, is voters like progressive taxes. They want the big guys to pay their fair share. And the cap is sort of the opposite of that, right? It's saying me, the homeowner, I got to pay my full load, but the box building downtown, they don't have to.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
So another way to phrase that is that demanding a cap is against the interests of the voters.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. It's in the interest of the large businesses and large property owners. That's right.
I'd
So-
love if there was effective ways that we could give carrots to like the chamber to high five them for being willing to go and support a uncapped measure here, because
yeah.
that's going to be really helpful for getting this thing to pass and for getting us the funds that we need for the district.
Yeah,
So I think that's the
I'm
name
on the
of the
same
game.
page, and I think that I don't need a soapbox, so I won't.
Yeah. So honing back in onto the tracking poll.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess my view is I still don't necessarily know that that changes my mind on the tracking poll. I believe that there's a scenario where we come back and there's a strong appetite from one side to put a cap, and we still don't, and we just kind of play it out. But that's how I see it.
But I guess if we said we did want to put a cap on it, you're still sort of like, I think we have baseline poll data that's good enough indicator that people want to do it and go forward with that. Yeah, I mean, personally, I kind of lean that way too, in terms of it. I'm not sure that, and even putting in the cap, I guess I'd have to see what the response was if it was something where it was like, yeah, really strong to say like it absolutely has to be there. And maybe, yeah, at that point though, it would really be just a question of like, would we be going forward or not? Not is it more successful or is it a non-starter, to put it in. Okay. So I think it's clear that we really need to understand if we think we need to put a cap on. And if we don't need to put a cap on, we don't feel like we need to go out for another tracking poll. It's not so clear if we did decide that we were considering putting a cap on, that we had strong indication if we thought we needed to go out for a tracking poll for that. David Weekly, did you have an opinion on whether we would go out for a tracking poll on that one?
On the fence about that.
On the fence, yeah. So I think If it's okay, I understand that it's a pressure time. Without that last piece of information of like whether we think we need to put it on, I think it's hard for us to be able to give that strong direction towards it. I did hear that people are interested in not sunsetting. Would we be testing sunset as well if we wanted to do that tracking poll? It was our biggest negative on the poll results, if you remember.
Yes.
And it's an easy thing for a negative campaign to sort of hang on to.
How many percentage points do we think we can move with that?
Well, if we could go back to the slide of the progression of the positives to negatives.
Right.
And I'm just the consultant, but I will say that if we don't do polling and we bring back a resolution to you next year, our recommended resolution will include a sunset. It's your decision whether or not to take that recommendation.
Okay.
But if you look at the drop in the basically second row to third row, we go from 73% to 66. And the number one reason to oppose the measure was because it did not expire and it would go on in perpetuity. So our rationale is if we can take the number one negative argument off the table structurally, we probably should when we're dropping down to just below 2/3.
Is
And
that like half the drop or just?
It's hard to say, to be honest.
I'm
but
asking you to hallucinate some numbers with me here. We just had a presentation on LLMs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, this took us from 73 to 66. If it had an 8-year sunset, we'd be at 70. Waving your hands a lot here. I understand.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
So first of all, the percentage that the argument against, which was the measure does not have an expiration date and will go on forever, we shouldn't vote for any measure that doesn't sunset, was 48%, at least somewhat more likely to vote no. That's half of the respondents. So if we were being AI, we'd probably say that half of the drop between 73 and 66 was related to that.
And proof of work.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
convincing answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And it sounds like that's what we're going to get recommended to do anyway.
Right.
So it's really like, do we want to test that as well?
Right. And the reason being is without a cap effectively takes your biggest threat of opposition off the table.
Right.
Right. Because you're lowering their
Right.
tax bill from hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to $500 or $2,500 or whatever. If you don't have that, then there is more risk for opposition. And so I would be more conservative on the other components of the measure structurally, especially because we know, citing other research, that the hardest measure to pass is always the first one. And I don't mean the first in a district. I mean the first time you're increasing. Once you've passed a new measure like this, going back and renewing it later, it's never easy, but
Right.
you have a track record of 8 years of spending to show your voters. That usually helps in getting it over the hump a second time.
These numbers are close enough to 2/3 that every percentage point matters.
Yeah.
You may have convinced me that
Yeah, I think
that an 8-year sunset needs to be in here for this to credibly pass.
So does that need to be tracked? Does that need a tracking poll? We're not going to make the final decision until we know about the cap, but would that be something that you wanted them to?
No, because I feel like that useful insight was already embedded in the data captured.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Okay.
When they talked about numbers, Brian mentioned like, 15 or 12 is like 10 or 10 is like 12. And does it really make a difference between 8 and 9 and 9? So do we want to go rather than 8 years to 9 years and 9 months?
Well, we don't have to make that.
We don't have to make that
Yeah.
decision.
And Brian was being a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
It's got to be a year long.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
eight or 9. I like 8 because it gets you past multiple election cycles,
Okay.
right? So you get multiple opportunities to renew it.
Okay, so I think our direction is we don't feel the need to go forward with a tracking poll right now. We would like to revisit that decision once we hear from whether we think our opposition is going to demand a cap. Probably the leaning so far is that even that we may not want to track, but it is a significant change and probably does merit some little bit of further reflection on that. The sunset is a good recommendation. It sounds like you're going to recommend that into our proposal as well. I don't think that from the discussion we've had here tonight that we feel like that needs to be pulled. The numbers seem to be pretty indicated from our baseline data. So really the one issue that we're wondering whether it needs to have a tracking poll would be putting in the cap. We're not sure we even need to put a cap in yet. We kind of need that information to be able to go forward. Were we able to provide you with the direction you were looking for tonight?
Phenomenal job.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks, Jeremy
Bradley.
and
Yeah,
Brian.
good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Jeremy, I'll be emailing you. Okay.
You
Okay.
hear that, everyone? We did a phenomenal.
All right. Discussion of board policies. We're turning into pros of this. I'm going to propose that we do the first couples in triplets because they're quite literally the same policies for the different employee groups there. So let's start with 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4. These are the first reading and discussion of board policies and ARs. 4119242 for 10.2, 4219.42 for 10.3, and 4319.42 for the exposure control. It's the exposure control plan for bloodborne pathogens. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything that they would like to ask or discuss on this item? I've learned from past meetings to wait. Okay, on to our next triplet. This is going to be 10.5, 10.6, and 10.7. We're discussing them together because they're going to be also the same policies, but for the different employee groups, the certificated, the classified, and then the other personnel that weren't called in those groups. This is the first reading and discussion of BP and AR 4119.43, 4219.43, and 4319.43, which is universal precautions. Does anyone have questions or comments or anything to discuss? No, seeing none, we will move on to the next triplet, 10.8, 10.9, and 10.10. This is the first reading and discussion of board policy 4151, 4251, and 4351. This is on employee compensation for the different employee groups. One thing I want to call out about this one is I did see that there was a highlight in there about paid monthly and an 11 or 12 equal payments over the year, depending on the work calendar of the classification. I'm assuming that was highlighted because it was meant to be discussed here tonight.
Not exactly, but I'll hand it over to Wendy.
The items in highlight are board policy committee and or staff recommendations. So in this particular case, fun fact, we have different work calendars for different employee groups. And so that's why the 11 or 12 month payments are noted as such in there. That might seem a little confusing, but different classifications have different work calendars which drive those payments.
Okay, got it. Yeah. The text underneath was in red, so I had thought it was just like, because last time we had a highlight for things that came from CSVA, so I was just, yeah, got it.
Yes, this is also my fault from last time.
Okay.
We're all learning.
Okay. Does anyone have questions or comments about employee compensation? All right. The following we're going to do one by one because they're not this similar repeats. So we're at 10.11. This is the first reading and discussion of board policy 4215. This is evaluation and supervision, and this is for classified personnel. No comments. Looks like it's the CSBA version that we're taking, so good. Okay, then we'll move on to 10.12, first reading discussion of board policy and AR 5141. This is healthcare and emergencies. I see a question or a comment.
Just a comment that, yeah, I just last week actually did my Red Cross First Aid AED CPR renewal training at PCC up the hill. Really good. You can save somebody's life if you know first aid. It cost me $85 out of pocket for all the materials, online, whatever. And just I would love to see the board find a way to encourage members of the district, whether that's staff or volunteers, teachers, et cetera, to to take these trainings. And if there are things that we can do to encourage it, I think that'd be pretty good because that equips people not only in their jobs here, but also as members of the community at large to be effective first responders and potentially save lives. So I wanted to float that. Is there any encouraging language that we could put in that could help encourage the district to promote such trainings, to have such trainings and have a larger percentage of our overall adult population be skilled first responders?
We do have that for some of our staff members.
Yeah, so in some classified job descriptions, there is a requirement for CPR training. Interestingly enough, the state just put in effect for emergency credential teachers, it's required, which is interesting. And then we actually have actively been promoting there was a grant for classified employees over a 4-year period that Antonio Perez was overseeing and Petrinia Red to train classified staff specifically on CPR and first aid, et cetera. And then the PE teachers are actually trained and will have their renewal coming. And then management was trained recently with Ana Herrera's funds. So that was back in June. But anyway, the point is that yes, there are pockets of groups that have been trained, and of course our nurses obviously are trained. For our 800 and some odd employees, 900 employees outside of volunteers or any other parents at that rate would be, about 76,000. And that would be then every 2 years. A lot of times it's about time actually to train and building that into our schedules and so forth. There's a difference between being certified and being trained. So we'd have to make sure we differentiate. But there is actually not one current board policy that specifically calls out CPR training and this. So that would be something new. But I just wanted to give you a little background. Sequoia Healthcare has been giving us some funds to do this work as well. So I do want to point that out. But no, there's not something systematic in place at this point.
Would this be the policy to insert encouraging language without necessarily obligating us financially? To try to make a best effort to find a way to encourage first aid, AED, CPR training for staff where possible.
Oh, please.
I was just looking at the top of the policy, right, where it says the governing, it would be what the governing board thinks, right? And I'll step back. It's great to hear that the district is already doing stuff, which is kind of what the theme is in general today and every time. What if we were to add something at the end of the first sentence there, just so the first sentence is the governing board recognizes the importance of taking appropriate action, ... And if there's a second clause, and encourages encourages staff to be trained as appropriate, or something to that degree. I don't know. Is that something that you have in mind?
Basically, yeah. I mean, that'd be a good first step in this direction.
I don't know what others think.
So at Sequoia, during PD, classified employees are actually not mandatory, but it's an optional if they want to take that as a PD. So they have the director of wellness actually teach the class during one of the sessions. I forget whether it's a certificate that we get or if it's whatever the other stuff that you just said. But that does happen on a yearly basis. So not everybody takes it, but it is an option. And it's not somebody from an outside agency, so it doesn't cost the district other than the time for the employee giving the training.
I think Sequoia also experienced the same grant we had that is just ending. So I'm curious to know if they'll continue that. That was lovely for 4 years because it was the same type of idea. In fact, we gave the trainings the President's Week for classified staff to come back. And then I believe a day in June. So there were days when students were not present. So it was voluntary, but when you make it voluntary, that doesn't ensure everyone. So I guess my question back was, I hear it's a little bit more about encouragement rather than requirement. In my world, it's one or the other. So I'm curious to know if the board's interested in funding it or if it's just essentially a sentiment about wanting to ensure that we're, available to assist and encourage. Yeah.
I'd be interested in exploring ways to fractionally fund it, maybe to like 50%. My comment was not intended to create an obligation for all staff to have formal certification, but I think if there's things that we can do to increase awareness and training, I think that we could see lives saved as a result. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking through it, like take, for example, the AEDs. It doesn't require that everybody get trained on AEDs. It just says that somebody has to be on site that's trained for it. I think that, that while I think it would be great for everybody should take the opportunity, I also think everybody should learn to swim. I need to have put that into the board policy? Maybe not. Perhaps saying that there should be on something around like there should be people trained for first aid response. I don't know if that's in a policy somewhere, but that might be the kind of the direction to kind of be parallel what we say for AEDs, where there has to be somebody on the site that's trained to be able to use it, but it doesn't mean that everybody has to be able to be trained to use it.
And I think some of the context here is that learning to swim is a pretty big deal and involves procedure, and learning how to use AED takes about like 5-10 minutes.
Sure.
And then you've got it. They're not all that complicated.
Yeah.
Right? So the burden is not very high.
Yeah.
I assume Wendy's going to look for direction on verbiage changes. I'll say just putting aside the funding pieces, I think I'd be okay with the sentiment, like encouraging something that's not obligating, because I don't think I'm prepared to put that in there. But if it's language about like supporting or encouraging staff to do it because we believe in the importance of it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it seems fine. An encouraged statement.
Yeah.
And maybe something just as simple as that. The board encourages staff to be trained in CPR, AED, et cetera.
And maybe in the fullness of time, we could turn that into formal programs that we make available, that make it very easy for them to sign up for these things, that we fund these things, et cetera. But we don't have to have that funding conversation tonight. Okay.
Wendy, does that give you direct? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
So that was not administering medication. That's the next one. So 10.13, first reading and discussion, BPNAR 5141.21. This is administering medication and monitoring health conditions. And I just want to give everybody a chance to chime in if you're interested. There was an option in this one. And option 2 was selected. And this is around what's the language that we use here? We said prohibit the governing board prohibits the administration of medical cannabis to students on school grounds. Comments, discussion? Okay, let's move on to 15.14. First reading and discussion of board policy 5141.5. This is mental health. Looks like it's all from CSBA. New requirements around cultural competency training, updated referral protocols. Anything to discuss here? Looks good to me. Okay. We'll move on to 10.15. First reading and discussion of BP and AR 6142.7. This is physical education and activity. I had one question for the policy committee, and I'm very sorry I didn't put this one in advance, but it was just, I noticed that under permanent exceptions, we struck out all the high school stuff, which makes a lot of sense. But then there was also one bullet that was just around the student is enrolled in a juvenile home, ranch, camp, or forestry camp school with scheduled recreation and exercise. Could that have applied to K-8, or is that only for high school as well?
I'll say from our discussions that I recall, that was not an intent. We were purely, I think, eliminating things that were high school only. But
Okay.
But we should, if that's not the case, yeah, we should look into that.
Ed Code 51241 is concerns exemptions from high school physical education
Okay,
requirements.
great. Okay, so as long as it's just talking about high school, that's all I wanted to know. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So that was struck appropriately. Cool. And again, I apologize for noticing that too late. Shall we move on? Okay. 10.16, first reading and discussion, BP and AR 6142.8, and this is comprehensive health education. I think the big thing is we're adding mental health. Mental health is being added into health education. Questions, comments? Yeah, okay, looks good to me. We have discussed our policies. Thanks, Wendy. We're going to move on to our consent agenda, and everything in the consent agenda is going to be considered routine and acted upon by the board in one motion. I will remind everyone that 11.14 has been pulled from the consent agenda, so we would be voting on 11.1 to 11.13 and then 11.15.
I move we approve the consent agenda accepting 11.14.
Okay, is
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Great. 12.1 has been pulled, so we have no action items. We're on to board and superintendent reports. Who would like to report first? By the way, it's 9 o'clock. We often take a break. I think we're close enough to the end that we should just power through. That's my recommendation. Everybody in? Okay, great. David Lee, please start.
I had 2 school site visits over the past week, one to Kennedy and one to Hoover, both of them very productive. Kennedy, I was intending to check out some classrooms, but I ended up just having a very nice, productive conversation with Jandra, which was great because it was the second time I've gotten to talk with her. But some highlights, I think she has self-designated or been designated as a warm demander, which is inspirational to me. I love that idea of keeping standards high, but still, coming forward with a good attitude. That is at least what was communicated to me. I love the idea. A lot of good things, I think, particularly for us, that I heard were going well were the enrichment program, the English Accelerator, what we're calling it, that seemed to be going well, positive feedback there, and no big hiccups. And then the smart device policy seemed to also be going well. I think there was some concerns, as predicted, about safety kind of at the beginning, but that's been headed off and addressed, and so it seems to be going pretty well there. The Hoover visit was also very nice. I know that I put in quotes another phrase that stuck with me was pleasantly persistent. So lots of things that I'm learning to aspire to. But I think it's a great mantra of just, do the most that we can, but again, with a good attitude. As always, a great, strong community feel. I think whenever I got to see a lot of classrooms there, and you can just see the relationships that Lupe has with students and staff, which is just very inspiring. And, including where there had to be some redirection, it was still done with an incredible amount of love, which was just great to see. That said, it's pretty clear there's a high need population. There's just a lot of stuff going on there that's unique to probably our Bayside schools in general, but certainly at Hoover, that they're not the same issues that are popping up everywhere else. And I think it's something to be mindful of, especially as we go through difficult decisions through the budget and just making sure that we're supporting all of our students. One other thing was just, and this is me, a broader conversation is just about the teacher retention and attraction. I think it can be challenging. I think we've seen this through teacher turnover at some of the higher need schools. And so just something that jumped out to me as I asked about, like, oh, how long has this teacher been here? And that's not to say that, new teachers can't be good, but stability is always nice to the extent that we can figure that out. But something that stuck out to me.
All right, thank you. Cecilia, do you anything to report?
Yes, so last week I attended along with Dr. Baker, Jorge, Michelle Raymond, and Aaron Keikos from North Star, and Miss,
I can't remember.
I forget her, one of the teachers. There were some parents representing some of the schools. I don't have the list with me. And then they actually had a student too, and the parent from North Star. And the parent talked about her experience going from Garfield, I believe, to North Star, and how her daughter has had just a great experience. They were a little hesitant at first, but the daughter is actually thriving. And so they talked about the programs and how and you guys have heard what North Star does. And so, it was nice to hear from a parent from the Bayside to see what their experience is like, because as we know, we are trying to pull more parents from the Bayside, and unfortunately, they're just not coming as we think that the numbers are not coming in as we slowly, but not as much as we wanted to. And then I forget what else we talked about because I don't have any of my notes.
So what we spoke about was we went through the budget process with them, if you recall. We did that portion and got their feedback. And then you also had Elizabeth that came to the last board meeting and talked about how the types of needs that Hoover has and what they want to continue with. So we talked about that. And then we also talked about the possibility of parcel tax during that and what a parcel tax is. And even though you may not be voting, it's good for you to know about this because you're not a homeowner, but you rent. So a possibility that your rent could, go up because of the parcel tax be passed on to you. So.
And I do recall there was a parent there that was like very involved at Garfield, and how she says she lives all the way by Target and she literally walks to all the meetings. And so, here we go, the commitment. And so I was telling them that's how I was. Like I was here as a parent. And so the lady is looking forward to maybe one day take a seat at the table. So that was really great. And then I also went to DLAC on Monday. So I actually did leave earlier. What I enjoyed about DLAC this time is we did have a little bit more, it was through Zoom. So there was a lot more parents connected, lots of questions and lots of answers within. So the parents were actually answering questions that other parents had. So then, I was able to see how their knowledge passes on to their friends. And so that was really nice to see. So yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, David.
Super cool when just knowledge can distribute through a community like that. So I met with the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, who had previously met with Trustee Lee. We had a wonderful chat with them about some of their history, their past engagements with Redwood City School District, and their interest in further engaging here, including running parent education groups. I did introduce them to Agustin, who's one of our emerging parent advocates for Hispanic parents here. And that seems like that is likely to be a very productive introduction. So that was very exciting. Was here last night, also with a bunch of community members, talking about some of the budget reductions. There was a lot of exciting and vigorous discussion that was there. Definitely highlighting that to a certain degree, every school in our district is actually kind of a school of choice that draws from a pretty large catchment, that there's complex interdependencies that exist between schools. There's interest in exploring a number of different efficiencies. I learned that every site buys its own technology. So some school sites might have excess Chromebooks and others were looking to buy Chromebook carts. And so just trying to better coordinate that might result in some savings. But there was no silver bullet. There was no single easy thing we could do to go and make this happen. But it did seem like we were starting to get some consensus about positive and viable paths forward. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that I had to report on. The other thing I'll point out is, first of all, there's three principals there. There's a bunch of parents that are there. Rick is there. John is there. Maria was there.
Catherine was
Catherine. Yeah. So it's pretty well attended. This is the one in English. And I think there were three main parts of it. There was the superintendent came with the proposal for how these budget cuts could look like. I think that'll be come out next week or so for people to look at. Then the committee, so all the parents talked about what they've heard from feedback from their school. And then there was some data presented to the committee, and so they got a chance to have some feedback on that. I believe all of this material will be up on the committee website, including the notes next week. Yeah, next week. If you want to go and look at it and see. But I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Just that I will be sending you each spreadsheet. I send it now, David. I'll send it to you digitally so you have it also. And it'll be a part of our conversation tomorrow, part of our conversation tomorrow, and part of our conversation with Cecilia also when we set up our meeting, or how we either tomorrow or Friday. So that was that meeting. And then on last week on Friday, I spent the morning with the chamber, and they had their education workforce day, and they had myself on a panel along with the superintendent from Sequoia and one of the board members from the County Office of Education. And we had set questions that were sent to us. At least the ones that they sent us were not the ones that were asked, but that was okay. You know, it was able to answer and respond, and I got most of them. So I don't know how that happened, but we had a lot of our own community members that their kids come to Redwood City School District. We had parents who have been in the district that are now have their own businesses or working for businesses in Redwood City that, you know, had a lot of favorable insights to how we are moving forward with the district, and really just applauded what we're doing. So it was great to hear that. So, and also some students that have grown up in the district and now are entrepreneurs or are working for major businesses in Stanford, and we're part of this group. So it was interesting to talk to them, not only as a large group, but then to answer individual questions after I was done, because they didn't have the timing correct. And the next group after us was the president from San Francisco State College, and some of her members were with her. So our time got a little short because of the difference of questions that they were asking compared to what my colleagues said. These were not the questions we were given. But anyway, so we went forward, but the whole essence of them learning about the Redwood City School District, what we do. Jorge did a great job with the pamphlets that I was able to take out and give around to all the tables on the different schools. So there's pamphlets each table, and there were like 15, about 25 tables in this room, and I gave each table about 10 different pamphlets which had different schools in the Redwood City School District, gave a little history. And one thing that one of the community members brought up is how exciting that we do have schools of choice, even though they may cause, you know, the district some chaos sometimes, and then some of our parents too, because they didn't get in and they're on a waiting list and so forth. They really enjoyed that being a factor in this school district, and had asked me, you know, were you thinking of expanding? And I go, it's expanded. All the schools, as we heard last night, they're basically all community, not community schools, but schools of choice. Schools of choice. The other piece that got me thinking about community schools is that was the question that was asked about community schools and how did community schools get started, because one of the participants has her niece at attending one of our community schools and wanted to know more about the wraparound services. She goes, how are you able to do that? You know, and gave a brief synopsis. And I said, well, if you're really interested in seeing it in action, just give me a call and I'll set you up with Michelle or Liz and you can go visit. But a lot of kudos from the audience about the Redwood City School District. So it's good that we're out there, and that the next superintendent has to also be part of that chamber. And Mike, you're part of it.
Yeah.
When you can get there.
I missed the
But it's a good group of people. But this is a larger group that goes to a leadership. They become this consortium that go for the whole year, which I'm going to ask probably Cecilia, have you been? Did you go, Mike?
I haven't.
So we should start each year somebody attend. You attend like one Friday per month, and it has to do with the Chamber of San Mateo County, and they purposefully take topics and bring in people so that you learn more about the chamber and how it supports not only education, but how it supports social services and so forth in the county. It's a full day, one Friday per month. They give you breakfast and they give you lunch, and So it's a good opportunity. I went because at one time, the superintendents in San Mateo County were required to go, and I went before I became a superintendent in it was 2013. It was 2013 when I went. And so they have as you're on the panel, they have your that you graduated. They give you a little graduate. It was 2013. I said, a long time ago. And Crystal hadn't been yet, hadn't been yet. And Ecto had been. So it'd be good for you all to, at some point in time, take turns. 1 year, one person go, next year somebody else go. And it's not very expensive for the district. It's like $300. So it's really good. So I'll encourage you, and I'll let the next superintendent know about it also.
Sounds good. All right, we're on to information. We're receiving some information about the San Mateo County Investment Fund, 4.1%. Any questions? No. Okay. Correspondence. Anybody want to acknowledge receipt of communication, make it part of the official record? David.
I got some interesting information about the Mills Act and various exemptions that were granted to homeowners in Redwood City whose properties are designated as historic. And apparently, actual compliance with the terms of the act is a pretty small percentage of the homeowners that are receiving Mills Act exemptions. And this costs the district a reasonable chunk of the change in terms of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're not getting due to homeowners getting historic property exemptions that they're not actually compliant with. It would not be up to us to remedy this, but it would be up to within the jurisdiction of the city of Redwood City. And so it was recommended that we petition the city of Redwood City to put a halt to granting further Mills Act exemptions or renewals. The exemptions tend to go on for 10 years. So I contacted a number of members of the city council.
Any other correspondence to put into the record? Okay. Any other business or suggested items for future agenda? If you've looked at the schedule, you'll see that like the TK report's coming up next. I didn't look farther than that, but I'm sure there's plenty more on the future agenda. Yeah, first interim. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I knew not to scroll just a little bit farther. I'm like, that's when all the excitement's gonna happen. David Lee.
Any thinking on the study session that I proposed?
I said it was on the agenda, so I can't. Well, let's talk tomorrow.
Okay.
Not yet, but it sounds like there'll be some follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to okay, so now we're on to meeting reflection. Things that worked well, things that didn't work well that we should stop doing and change.
Loved your triplets, dude. Just I like how you diligently work through batches.
I mean, if you're gonna throw like 20 policies at me, I'm gonna find a way to make sure we can get through them efficiently.
That was
But
great.
I'll still giving them the due measure and time of deliberation that we deserve to give them and that they earn.
Taking the beat to make sure nobody missed it. That was masterfully done. And Evelyn, great job. The clock counting up, I noticed that was all very well orchestrated. So
Cecilia, David Lee, any feedback? Things we should continue to do, stop doing anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I think I wasn't thinking of the triplets that you talked about, but I just want to say thank you because I just love the way you kind of reel us back in when maybe we shift a little bit to a different direction. So I appreciate that about you. So thank you.
Okay, this is not my agenda item. This is our item, but thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
We all love Mike. He does a great job. Thank you, Mike. I actually did write down. I did write down that I appreciate that Mike keeps us timely to the best of his ability, which is limited, granted, but he does a great job. But I generally do appreciate that. And relevant to that, I thought the presentations I enjoyed the ratio of time of presentation to discussion that we had. I thought it was really rich, which is great. Like I'd love to hear more, like through the discussion. So that was really helpful. One thing which isn't, I don't think is anything we can really change, is just kind of what it is today. But I do think about like, are we spending the majority of our time talking about like student outcomes? And I think I'd put the AI stuff in that category because I think we are really there. The rest of the stuff is kind of like feels procedural, but it's also stuff like we have to do. So it's not, yeah, not like a we need to change something, but more just a reflection of, that was, not what I'd hoped for.
It's always good for us to be thinking about, are we keeping the meetings focused on student achievement as much as possible? Yeah.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Evelyn's pacing guide, and this time having this split down between the presentation and the discussion. And I thought our presenters did a really good job of sticking around to that time. I was actually really impressed. I mean, when you come in with a longer, like Jeremy came in with like 15 slides and said he was going to do them in 10 minutes. Didn't believe it. He was done in 7. And the AI was really close to their time. So I think that really helps allow us to have discussion without feeling like we're keeping them for too long and being able to move on. So that worked out great. I don't know what coordination you do behind the scenes, Evelyn, with everyone to let them know or ask them and all of that, but thank you so much for putting that in. It's incredibly helpful.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay, let's move on to the meeting calendar. I think we have a meeting on Friday, closed session. The 10th will be our next meeting. There's a closed session before that. Yeah, okay. Anything else for the meeting calendar that we need to know?
AEC.
We'll be at AEC. That's not a meeting, so definitively not a meeting. Okay, I think that's it. And then yeah, and just for calendaring, it's the closed session starts at 5:45 on the 10th. So just make sure that you're able to get here for that. On to adjournment.
It
Can I
says WFH on the calendar.
that workforce housing.
Got it. Not
Work from home. Workforce. Yeah.
In person. I like that one. Work from home.
Yeah. You'll also see it sometimes as EWH for employee workforce housing. All right, 19 adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.